Well, good morning, everybody, and happy 1st of December if you're listening live. My first December show, so welcome. If you're someone who had an advent calendar to open this morning, I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, here's your very first kind of advent surprise. You've got me here on Teachers Talk Radio here for the next hour. We've got a brilliant guest joining us shortly. And if you are listening back, I hope December is going well for you, or whatever month you're listening. I almost can't believe it's December. And I'm also amazed to tell you that while I was on my way to the Teachers Talk Radio studio this morning, it was snowing, which was very, very cool. Because I wasn't sure if we would have snow or not. I'm looking out the window, it has actually stopped now. So panic off, the roads should be fine for the rest of the day, hopefully. But it did feel very Christmassy and magical to see some sprinkles of snow coming down this morning. If any of you are already connected with me on social media, you might have seen that I was letting my chickens out this morning and they were not very impressed at all as I opened their coop to come out into the garden. They were very hesitant, but luckily with some corn. They have Poultry Gold, which they love because it has chicken pellets and corn, which is very good to keep them extra toasty in this cold weather. But let's not get sidetracked talking too much about chickens, because we are here today to welcome a very special guest. I'm going to be talking about subjects such as teacher autonomy, sustainability, and generally about how we prepare students for their futures in our society, and what that society may even be like. So welcome everyone that is listening in. Welcome, I can see Superfan David is here listening in, and he's just sent me a virtual coffee. Hopefully there's a nice gingerbread syrup or something in there, David, to keep it seasonal. And also very excited to say our guest is also just arriving in our studio as well. Our guest, you may know, is Dr. Morgan Phillips. And when Morgan and I were talking about the topic for today's show, we settled on the title, Why Aren't We Giving Teachers and Learners More Freedom? So I'm sure as we go through, Dr. Morgan will tell us more about his passion for this topic. But as he is here, good morning, Dr. Morgan.
Morning, Poppy. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, I can. How are you? Have you had snow this morning?
We've had a hard frost, but no snow yet. We're down by the sea, so it's okay.
Oh, wow. Well, hard frost. So you're on stage one.
Yeah.
Too cold for snow. A lot of people told me yesterday when it was frosty here. I love how everyone's a weather expert when it's snow season.
Yeah.
But welcome, and it's great to have you here. And I hope it's okay. I've got a whole list of questions for you for the next hour.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Grill your expertise. Now, we're so delighted that you could come and join us. And maybe before we dive in with some of these questions, and they're quite heavy ones for Friday, I'm not going to lie. We've got some big topics for Friday, sustainability, teacher autonomy, and preparing for the future. But let's begin. Let's learn a bit about you, please. Maybe you can tell us a bit of a kind of a background to you, your educational journey leading up to your current role, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Poppy. I won't go on for too long. So I grew up in West Wales, which is where I live again now. Went to Newquay Primary School, Aberystwyth Comprehensive School, went on to do a geography degree at Leicester University, and then a master's in environmental science policy and planning at Bath University, and a PhD in environmental education then at University of Gloucestershire. So it took me a while to get into the real world, and then after that, I've basically been working for a number of different environmental and sort of development charities of varying sizes. So Global Footsteps, the Glacier Trust, Keep Britain Tidy, and currently now I work for Global Action Plan, where I head up our Generation Action work, which is the title we give to our kind of education and youth engagement work. So that's where I'm now, and I've got a fantastic team, and we do a whole load of different projects and programs, which people can obviously look up. But that's where I'm at now, and I'm really interested in not just sort of how we do environmental education kind of within the existing system, but actually thinking about how the existing system maybe needs to shift a little bit so that we can have more opportunities to do sustainability education and do it well to hopefully create a green and thriving planet, which is kind of Global Action Plan's sort of strapline.
Excellent. Wow. And I love the way you just made that seem so effortless as well, Morgan. Just like, degree, master's, PhD, and now just saving the world. So,
Wow, I'm very very privileged to have had the opportunities I've had, and sort of grateful for them. And yeah, and it's something actually we always have to kind of keep in mind. I think is it's we can make it sound effortless, but we're I'm lucky, to have been born where I've been born in the circumstance I've been under, and a lot of people don't have those opportunities. So yeah, I never try to never lose sight of that.
Wonderful. I love that. Very humble of you. And so I guess are you following the we've obviously got COP28 going on at the moment, Conference of the Parties, for anyone listening who wasn't sure what the COP stood for. Is that something you kind of follow, kind of what's going on with COP28? Is that relevant to your work?
Yeah, it's definitely relevant. We just and we're really interested in kind of how we can get youth voices and youth perspectives sort of into those conversations, which is starting to happen a bit more now, but obviously not as much as we'd like. There was some good sort of agreements yesterday about the commitment to have a fund for loss and damages, which has been called for decades. And I used to do a lot of work in Nepal with Nepalese farmers in the mountains there, and they so badly need the support to adapt and to kind of recover from the kind of the impacts they're having. So it's great to see that happen. And yeah, we keep an eye on it for sure. I think we are. I think across the environmental sector, we have a love-hate relationship with the COP process. I mean, some parts of it are great, and some parts of it are really make you despair. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Like, but very much what you're saying as well. Like, it all depends where you're born and where you live. I recently was doing a module with my students for our key paradigms, and we were looking at extreme poverty in the world. Slightly off topic, but we were looking at extreme poverty, and I was trying to explain to my students, in those areas of extreme poverty, we were looking at a wheel that showed the most poor countries in the world, and you can't really get your head around it. And we were talking, like a fictional case study. There's someone, do they send their children to school, or do they keep them home to learn how to work on the farm? And some of us can't even imagine our children not just going straight into the education system. And my students were like, how do we even begin to answer that? And luckily, for many of us, we won't have to ask those questions. Our children can just, skip off to school for many of us. Really so geographically diverse, isn't it, our planet?
Oh, it's amazing. And yeah, the levels of inequality kind of within countries, I mean, it's even within the UK, it's pretty extreme, the inequalities, but between countries, even more so. Yeah, and like I say, I was lucky enough to work in Nepal, and yeah, and those case studies, as fictional ones, they're real ones. I've had the conversations with people about should we keep our, how many hours a day can I afford to let my child go to school? Those are conversations I've had with people, and yeah, it just shows. But they're also learning when they're on the farm as well. So it's not like they're not learning.
Exactly, learning those different skills. Exactly, learning in different ways. And yeah, I know I've got a question to ask you later about how we prepare people for their futures. But yeah, really interesting, isn't it, how we do become, I think, institutionalized. This is what education should look like. And actually, particularly with artificial intelligence, which I'm sure we'll touch on later as well, swimming into our classrooms, actually, what will our society look like? And I know Elon Musk said there'll be no jobs in 20 years or whatever. So, actually, do we need to shift the way we educate our young people, and what might that look like? So I'll be interested in what you think on that later, Morgan.
Yeah.
One other thing, actually, I wanted to ask you, it wasn't on my list of questions, but I don't know if you saw this. I saw it on social media last night. I can't remember which town it was in, but one of those kind of sensational, trying to grab the media's attention. There was a food bank tree. Have you seen it?
No, I've not seen this.
So I can't remember where it was. Somewhere in the UK, built a food bank tree, and I think it's a 24-foot tree made of food bank items. And with a post like that, it was a news article online. You've got to go for the comments. I was straight to the comments, and everyone just saying, I'm sure people would prefer if those food items were on their shelves, or I'm sure those items would be better in a food bank. So I just wondered if you'd seen it. But something for you to look up after the show, Morgan.
Oh, well. Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, Christmas, we know, is a tough time for many of us. So yeah, really interesting what we can do. But anyway, that's for show 2. We'll get you back in the future to talk more about. So let's dive in then, because I know when we were setting the topic for the show, you were telling me about your interest in the freedom of teachers, and I was kind of surprised that was something you wanted to talk about. So my first question is, why is an environmental charity interested in the freedom of teachers and learners?
Yeah, it's yeah, I guess it's an opportunity to actually thinking more broadly about what the education system needs to look like for sustainability, and that's kind of one of the questions which is, or kind of one of the solutions potentially, I think that we could be looking at is the freedom of teachers, and it's probably quite a nuanced sort of argument discussion about why we think that is and why we are interested in it, which I'm sure we'll get into, and I won't blast it all out now in one big splurge, but really, firstly, on a human level, I mean, putting all the environmental issues to one side, the education system, we have a lot of interaction with teachers and with learners through our work. They're being starved of autonomy at the moment, and so on a really human level, we just really feel for them because haven't got all that freedom that they should have over how to teach and how to learn, and they don't have they have even less sort of freedom over what topics they can engage with when they're in the classroom in the formal education system, and that is really can be really demotivating and demoralizing and patronizing, and the teachers are feeling undervalued. So on a human level, we're interested in it, and then on a kind of as an environmental charity, like the climate and nature crisis, we've discussed a bit of it already. I mean, it's pretty wild. I mean, I don't think people quite appreciate how advanced some of the environmental crises we're seeing are at the moment. So we look at air pollution a lot in our work, and there's a piece of research called the Air Quality Life Index, and that shows that 98% of people in the world live in areas where the air pollution levels exceed what is a safe level, as the WHO calls it. So that means that billions and billions of people, they're losing years off their lives, and not just a little bit. We're talking
Wow.
sort of
Did you say
2 years.
98%?
Yeah, 98% of people, live in areas where air pollution
98% of
exceeds.
people are living in what's seen as a dangerous air pollution.
Yeah, well, above safe levels, definitely. So it's not just a
Wow.
kind of. I mean, I'm sure if anybody's traveled to kind of global south capital cities, they you can really experience the air pollution. But it's a big issue in London. It's a big issue in Birmingham, across all the big cities in the UK. And
Am I safe in Essex?
probably not. There's depending where you are in Essex, if you're in a town or city.
Wow.
There's a good chance that air pollution levels there, from cars, from log burners, from ammonia, from agriculture, and so on. All these things are contributing to air pollution, and it's potentially 2 or 3 years off your life as a result of
Wow.
that. So there's that. That's just one example. There's loads of examples. I saw a story the other day about the North American wolverines, which is they're an amazing little creature and really tenacious, but they need snow to dig dens so they can give birth to their offspring.
Mm-hmm.
And because of climate change, their homes are literally melting away in the snow mountains in the US. And so that's something that's happened. And finally, now there's been some protections put in place for some of their habitats, but it's that's just one animal. There's loads of animals that are affected in similar ways. And I guess if anybody's been following the news over the last year, or kind of the sort of stories about temperature increases, this has been one of the hottest, well, probably the hottest year on record. There's been 38 days this year that have been above 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial average. So, this is the target, 1.5 degrees, that we want to try and keep temperature increases below. But there's been 38 days this year that have gone above it. There's actually a few days last month or maybe a couple of weeks ago that were above 2 degrees. And so we're already sort of going past those kind of upper limits of what is deemed to be safe, and we know as 1.5 isn't safe, and 2 degrees certainly isn't safe. And so we're getting more and more heat waves, flooding, hurricanes, storms, and they have that's a kind of fast violence that kind of visits people's lives and causes huge amounts of damage and disruption. But we're also getting the slow violence as well of, as temperatures creep up, it means that farmers, who used to be able to grow a crop at a certain sort of latitude or a certain altitude, are now having to try and shift, maybe up the hill to be able to grow that crop if they can, if that land's available, if the hill's tall enough. And you've got things like wine growers kind of ripping out their vines because those varieties of grapes that maybe did grow in Bordeaux quite well now can't grow because it's getting too hot, and they're not able to cope with the intensity of the summer heat, and so they're having to introduce grapes that which have previously grown in sort of south of Portugal or south of Spain. And so there's all this going on all the time, and this is only at the moment we're about 1.2 degrees of warming on average, but obviously it's going up and up, and we could be talking
Yeah.
3-4 degrees of warming within the century, which the impacts are huge. So as an environmental charity, we're therefore, with all of this going on, we're looking for as environmentalists, I guess, and we're all kind of environmentalists some way, hopefully. We need to find as many levers as possible to pull to try and create the social and the cultural and the economic changes. Actually, they're more like transformations that need to happen to be able to slow the climate change and nature loss down, to adapt to it, and so on. And education is one of those levers. So this is why we're interested in education, and why environmentalists are interested in it, and have been for a long time. But what we need to be doing is to be really smart about how we pull that education lever. And what direction do we pull it in? How hard do we pull it? How much of a shift in the education system is needed? And for us, I think giving teachers and learners more freedom is one of the things we want to do when we're kind of pulling on that education lever.
Wow, thank you so much for explaining all of that. I mean, and I totally agree with you. It's also about thinking what is, we don't like change in education, do we? So I totally agree with you. It's going to be about thinking what, the size of the lever, when we pull the lever. But can I heckle? And, my listeners will know we like to make it a little bit spicy on Teachers Talk Radio. What then? Because I love social media, and I post a lot, but I also read a lot. And I have seen people, a small corner of people, saying climate change isn't a thing. And actually, when they look at history, that we had these heat waves and droughts and things in a cycle 100 years ago, I don't know the exact numbers. Like, what's your response to that? Is that something people bring to you?
To be honest, no, we don't. I don't ever really come across that directly. I mean, obviously, on social media you get the kind of the trolls, and you're not sure whether they're real people or not anyway these days, especially on Twitter /X or whatever you want to call it. I think that sort of contrarian thinking is hopefully dying off. I think it's really hard for anybody with a straight face to say that they think that human caused climate change isn't happening. I think it's becoming an increasingly fringe view, and I think it's actually one of those things where it's better not to talk about it at all and engage with it, because it just reinforces that frame, and it kind of creates this idea that there is a debate here and there isn't really a debate here. So tend not to engage with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm on your side, just to stress I'm not one of those.
No, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are.
David said in the chat, these may also be people that believe the Earth is flat. Yeah. So exactly right. We'll always see, two sides to an argument. But no, I was just interested if that, if that was something that you, and it's good to hear that's dying out. But I mean, equally, Paul, that means there is an issue we need to respond to. And I think why I'm so interested to have you on today, because without our planet, we will not exist. So why is this not the core of our curriculum? Rather than just having those, I've seen walk to school, like pushes and things like that. When I was a primary teacher, we used to have a chart with all the children's name, and they'd tick if they walked to school, try and, be more friendly for the environment, and recycle pushes at school. But generally, why is caring for our planet kind of not higher up on the curriculum? Why is geography, for example, such a marginalized subject? So I guess it leads quite nicely into my next question for you, Morgan, then. How should the education system be responding to this climate and nature crisis?
Yeah, and this is the kind of the question we wrestle with a lot. And I guess I should really just talk about the education system in England here, rather than kind of UK wide, because it is obviously different in Wales and Scotland and so on, who arguably are doing a bit better on this. But in England, how should it be responding? I think a lot better than it is right now. I think right now, like you say, it's marginalised, and there's not a lot of it happening. So yeah, for me, it's woefully inadequate. Like, climate change really in schools is being treated like a minor threat. I have two nephews and a niece, and sort of a corner. They came to visit and over the summer, and I sort of sat them down and one at a time saying, "What do you know about climate change?" And we're talking sort of a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 17-year-old, and none of them knew much about it at all. So their school isn't. It's something they have maybe one or two lessons about during their school, almost through the whole of their school life. So they're kind of aware of it, but it's like a drop in the ocean, really. Like it's just being thrown in. It's just one of very many things in the noise that they hear. So it's just not coming through, and that's not true in all schools. Some schools are really doing good stuff on it, and really committed and passionate teachers and students. They're finding a way to actually bring sustainability and climate issues into their teaching and learning, and they're doing stuff kind of outside of the curriculum, or they're kind of using there's great resources out there to help teachers to weave these issues across the curriculum. There's plenty of stuff out there, and like part of what we do as a charity is to try and share that stuff and promote it and get it out there to teachers. So it's not responding well, but I don't think it ends there really, because, and I think this touches on what you just said before, like it's not just what the education system is failing to do that's problematic. What it does do is problematic too, and arguably more so. So the education system in England currently kind of activates and reinforces a whole set of values and beliefs and worldviews that underpin and kind of shore up today's hyper-consumerist and unsustainable society, which is obviously highly problematic from an environmental perspective. So if you think about what the purpose of education currently is towards perpetuating the current economic system, the current social and cultural norms, and continues to push those. And those things are driving, huge overconsumption of resources, goods and services, which are causing all of the environmental issues that we're facing. So it's kind of, because education system is part of that kind of process of perpetuating a hyper-consumerist society. It's not just what it's not doing which is a problem, it's what it is doing as a problem as well. And that means, when we're kind of, as environmentalists, and I think not just environmentalists, because these are huge social justice issues as well, we need to not just be talking about how we can kind of make tweaks to the curriculum or introduce a bit more climate change into a few more subjects here and there. We need to be a lot bolder in our campaign asks and think more holistically about the education system and how it can potentially transform the world. Because that's it needs to play a role in doing that, and that means it might just have to be revolutionized. And like you say, we don't like change, and I think it's I think, well, some people do like change, I think, but thrive on it. But there's a need for it to be a slow revolution rather than a fast one. I don't think fast revolutions work well in education at all. No, you try and rush it in, it doesn't work. My dad's a retired teacher, and we have a lot of these conversations, and he always moans about kind of flip-flopping in terms of policy direction that he experienced through his career and how frustrating it was. But you need slower revolutions which take a decade or so to bed in properly, rather than try and rush it in. But in the planetary history, a decade is a drop in the ocean. So we have to kind of think about in those terms.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's about drip feeding and those kind of daily manageable habits as well, isn't it? And that's why it's so surprising, to hear you talking to those members of your family who are, young people, teenagers, that are not aware of these issues. We're kind of doing our children a disservice, aren't we? And like you say, we're generalising, because some schools are doing excellent work in this field. But I've got a question for you. Let's throw in a quiz question.
Yeah, okay.
Linked to, you've inspired me what you're saying about consumerism, because I do think this is part of the problem. We've made life so easy for ourselves, and we choose not to think about how that ease is happening. So how many boxes do you think Amazon, other shipping is available through other websites, but how many boxes do you think they use a day, cardboard boxes?
Globally?
I mean, they don't divulge their results, but we've got an estimate that I found online.
I'm going to go for 3 billion.
Okay. Well, okay, it's not quite that much. But I swear, again, it could be 3 billion, but the number that we've got is an estimated 1,600,000 packages a day.
Wow, that is a lot.
But I mean, that's a lot of boxes.
It's an amazing
I have about a million in my house.
And that's just one company, hey?
And that's just one company. Yeah,
maybe. I'm showing up my lack of numeracy skills.
it's not my strong area either. I was looking recently, what £1 million would actually look like, what £1 billion would look like, and I was looking at number blocks with my 4-year-old. There's lots of amazing videos online of what 1 million and 1 billion look like. But just things like this that we're using to make our lives easier, but forgetting that behind them is going to be that consequence. So this leads quite nicely into my next question. No numbers involved.
Good.
We'll do one more question, then we'll jump for our news break. But I wondered then, do we need to redefine? And I think we've kind of touched on probably yes. Do we need to redefine the purpose of the education system?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, and it's a broader kind of question, isn't it, about the purpose of what we're trying to do as a society, full stop, isn't it? And the education system is part of that. So, and I think for me, I'm reasonably clear on what I think the purpose should be, and I actually think there's kind of two purposes, and they kind of overlap each other. So, for me, education sort of first and foremost should be about enabling young people to think for themselves, and and then the second thing is that given where we are with the climate crisis, inequality, injustices, ecological breakdown we're seeing, we also need really the education system to be preparing young people for a future that is deeply uncertain. So we don't really know what's coming. So we could be living in a world where it's 1.5 degrees warmer than the average, or even probably 1 degree warmer than now, or 4 degrees warmer than now. And those worlds are going to be very, very different. Like a 4 degrees warm world is going to be vastly different to a 1 degree warmed world. And we don't really know where we're headed with that. And so that creates a whole lot of uncertainty about the future. The idea that today's kind of semi-stable conditions, I mean, it's less stable. The world feels less stable right now than it did when I was in school. But the idea that stability is going to continue, that we can kind of have a good estimate of what the world will look like in a decade's time or 2 decades time, I think is we don't really know, do we? And it's not going to be. We don't really have this stable thing. And like you said at the top, like things like AI, we don't know how that's going to play out yet. And we also don't know what other things are going to be invented in the next decade, which could have impact. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty. So really the purpose of education for me should be really thinking about how we prepare young people for uncertainty, but also how we can enable them to think for themselves rather than kind of being told what to think and how to think. So those for me should be the kind of the two purposes, and I guess we can get a bit more into that in a bit now.
I really like that, and I agree. Those are really the two things education should do. But often, as I argue with my students who training teachers, maybe we're not always doing that. We are too stuck in this academic cycle, of assessments and numbers. And actually, I really like that kind of authenticity of what you're saying, that it should just be about preparing for uncertainty. But don't you think that's the problem? We don't like uncertainty. We don't like sad, scary things.
No, but it's uncertainty could, it can also be a hopeful thing, because a lot of people feel like the world isn't very good right now, and they're being beaten up by it. I mean, for the majority of people, it isn't great right now when you look at it.
Yes, yeah.
And so part of the uncertainty is that it could get better, and young people can help to shape it to become better, and that's a more positive thing, because some people don't want it to stay like it is now, because like it is now isn't great for them.
Great. Okay, I like that. On that hopeful note, let's jump to the news. Morgan, don't go away. We'll be back, everyone, in about 8 minutes' time, and maybe we'll start to think about then, Morgan, how we can prepare young people for this uncertain world.
Great. Thanks, Poppy.
Thank you so much so far, and be back with you all soon. Don't go away.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, BET UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials and working groups at BET, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at BET 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
School summer holidays are often a hot topic, but they made the news again in The Guardian as leaders in Wales appear to be considering changes. According to reports, Wales's Minority Labour Administration wants to shrink summer breaks from 6 weeks to 5 and eventually reduce it to 4 weeks. The plan would see the time added to half-term breaks in October and May. The proposal would equalise the length of terms and break the connection with Easter by fixing the timing of the spring break regardless of when the religious festival falls. The newspaper says the plans follow research by the government which suggests that parents struggle to organise and pay for childcare over the summer. Plaid Cymru, which supports the proposal, said in a statement that the current calendar was outdated as it was designed a long time ago, and that some families find the summer break very long and impacting negatively on their well-being. However, the article also points out that evidence of the harm to learning from school holidays is unclear, as much of the evidence comes from the United States, where summer holidays can be up to 12 weeks long rather than the 6 to 7 weeks in the UK. John Hattie, Professor of Education at the University of Melbourne, said the effects from school holidays are very small, and there is little reason to believe that the length of the school year has much effect at all. A study from 2019 that looked at pupils from primary schools in an area of high deprivation in Scotland and England found no effect on reading skills. In Northern Ireland, schools typically have 8 weeks off in the summer, but generally have results in exams that are better than those in England or Wales. However, a 2022 study did find evidence of worsening mental health in some age groups over long summer breaks. Surveys done in Wales found 60% of parents said they were quite happy with the school year as it is. In 2013, then Education Secretary Michael Gove gave schools in England the power to choose the timing of holidays, but most schools kept the 6 weeks. The BBC News website reports on the Beyond Ofsted inquiry. The inquiry is chaired by former Schools Minister Lord Knight and is funded by the National Education Union. The report from the inquiry recommends that schools should instead be responsible for their own improvement plans. Ofsted has responded by repeating its previous statement that inspections are needed to ensure a high-quality education. The inquiry said that Ofsted was now seen by many as toxic and not fit for purpose, and in need of major reform. The removal of single-word judgments was also recommended, and this echoed another report on school improvement released earlier by the Institute for Public Policy Research, which also called for narrative-style judgments rather than single words. The Beyond Ofsted inquiry recommended stopping Ofsted from having direct contact with schools, and instead schools should draw up their own improvement plans, which would make them accountable to parents and the wider local community. Lord Knight, speaking to the BBC, said Ofsted created a culture of fear in our schools. His report also said that Ofsted had become under-resourced for the high-stakes job expected of it. A spokesperson for Ofsted said 9 out of 10 schools say inspections help them to improve. In related news, the current Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, has written in her final annual report about parents being increasingly willing to challenge school rules in England. She described the unwritten contract between home and school as fractured and that it will take time to repair. The report is broadly positive, but draws attention to a shift in behaviour, attendance and attitudes to education since the pandemic, describing it as leaving a troublesome legacy. Full details of her comments can be found across media outlets. Teach First has celebrated its 20th anniversary, with 3 former Prime Ministers praising the charity's work in tackling education inequalities. According to Teach First's own website newsfeed, the charity has recruited more than 16,000 teachers to work in disadvantaged areas across England. Teach First CEO Russell Horby reaffirmed the charity's mission to help Britain's most disadvantaged children to achieve their full potential. Finally, student immigration data has been released, with Home Secretary James Cleverly stating the biggest drivers of immigration to the UK are students and healthcare workers. He further commented that this was testament to our world-leading university sector. According to data, Indian nationals account for over 1/4 of all sponsored study grants, followed by Chinese nationals. The education sector relies heavily on students applying to UK universities for significant funding. But there is also political pressure to reduce net immigration. Any plans to make changes to the current system will be monitored carefully, although for now the focus remains on illegal migration rather than legal routes. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
You've been listening to
Well,
Teachers
welcome back, everyone. And I have to say a big sorry. That was my dog at the start of the news there. As I've just said, I think she's dying to be a guest on my show. But sorry for you, Nova. My guest is the amazing Dr. Morgan Phillips. Welcome back, Morgan.
Thanks, Poppy. I think your dog was talking more sense than me, to be honest.
Oh gosh, you know they do say never work with animals. But welcome back, listeners. And so you've got lots of new listeners that have joined as well before the first half of the show. But do remember you can listen back if you missed the first half. But really interesting show and something a bit different today, which is always nice. We're talking to Dr. Morgan about issues such as sustainability, climate change, and how we can really bring this into the classroom. So let me just check my list on my clipboard. Right, I've got about 3 questions left. We've got about 20 minutes, Morgan. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Let's smash it. Okay, so before the break, you were laying out for us your 2 kind of dreams or your 2 visions for education. So the next question, I want to jump right in with you. How can we prepare young people for the uncertain world that lies ahead of them?
Yeah, and this is something there's quite a lot of schools of thought around how we do this, and it's becoming something which more and more people are talking about. UNESCO, OECD, and so on. It's a big conversation globally, and we need to I think we need to rewind a little bit though, just to talk about how education has been instrumentalized for quite a long time. Like education is used as an instrument to pursue a particular political objective, and normally what that's trying to do is trying to get pupils to kind of prescribe to a kind of predetermined mode of thinking. So if you think about the agenda of those running the education system in England right now, they're quite transparent, I think, around it. So especially things like fundamental British values, they're kind of saying these are the things which we want you to think are really, really important, and trying to instill those values in your people. And it's happening in more opaque ways as well, around values around competition, status, image, and wealth, and those are the things you're sort of aiming for your education. And so that's going on. So when we think about changing the purpose of education, there's also, if you think about if the chief execs of all of the big environmental charities suddenly were kind of to form the government, and one of them was to be Secretary of State for Education, they'd be tempted, I'm sure, to switch the purpose of education to sustainable development. So we'd
Mm-hmm.
have education, which was kind of education for sustainable development, and they'd have their own particular definition of what sustainable development is, which would be laced through with their own values and beliefs and perspectives and biases and so on. And presumably they then want young people to graduate from school thinking like them. So having their definitions of what's important and their definition of sustainable development. And sustainable development is a very contested kind of term. And so what that does then is rather than enabling young people to think for themselves, it's kind of saying you should think like us. And just to point out, I don't think this is what the environmental NGOs would do and want to do. I think they're more enlightened than this. But that when we're thinking about sort of what education is for, when we're sort of saying it's for, we want to try and get young people to believe a certain thing or to think in a certain way, that is kind of, for me, it's fundamentally against the spirit of education, which is, to enable young people to think for themselves and to actually understand the world for themselves and discover it for themselves. So while it's tempting to switch the purpose of education to sustainable development, it's really problematic. And there's a great paper on this. So it's actually more of an article, Bob Jickling, 1992, why I don't want my children to be educated for sustainable development. I won't go into it all now. People can look it up.
Oh, thank you. Something to read for the weekend.
Headline.
No, yeah, I love a sensational headline.
but it's actually, he is an environmentalist and actually sort of talks about why it's important. So back to that question of how we prepare young people for an uncertain world. Like I said, there's two schools of thought of it. I mean, we have to start from a place where we're being honest with ourselves about the future, that we don't know what it will hold. And like I talked about before, kind of the age of stability is sort of ebbing away, and it could become even more uncertain as climate breakdown kicks in even further. So what do you do? So the two options are, you either prepare young people to simply be able to adapt to whatever emerges in the future. So you develop what's called their adaptive reactivity, or you prepare them to be agents of change, capable of working together to transform the world. And this is sort of developing what's called their agentic world making. So they kind of have agency. They believe that they have the power to change things, and they kind of have both the desire to do it and the skills to do it. So they're two quite different positions. So that adaptive reactivity one is a lot more passive. It assumes the kind of agenda of individualism, hyper-consumerism is going to go on and on, but in a more unstable world. And the education should be preparing young people to sort of cope with this. So it's quite individualistic and it's quite passive. Whereas the kind of agentic world making is a lot more active, and it's a lot more sort of, it's less individualistic, a bit more collective. And it acknowledges that people can and do shape the world, usually by working together. But it critically, and this goes back to the kind of thing around enabling young people to think for themselves, it doesn't tell students what the world should be. It enables them to work that out for themselves and decide it for themselves, discover it for themselves, usually together, and then to go about set out creating it because they have this agentic world making. They feel able to create change.
Wow.
So that's
I love that term. That term is
great.
So dreamy. I love it. Agentic world making.
I came across it via Professor Noah Sobe, who I don't know if you've had him on here. He's brilliant. He's in Chicago. He's a sort of historian of education. He's looking at these things. So it's kind of instrumentalized to an extent because we're using education still as a tool to kind of nurture change makers in the future, but it's only sort of lightly instrumentalized. It's not sort of you must think in this way and sort of follow our beliefs about what the world should be. It's actually saying, we trust you. If we set you free to learn and discover the world for yourselves and to work together and feel like you can change it, we trust that you will create a better world and a green and thriving planet. It's how we talk about it as Global Action Plan. We wouldn't ever sort of define what that is for young people. It's for them to work out what that is.
I love that. Yeah, it just feels like you say is kind of giving the power back to them as the young person, going forward. That is, it sounds too good to be true. I mean, is this something we can do in our current education system? Right, let's go on to my next question, because this links quite nicely then. So I wondered, for you and your current work, do you kind of have a vision then of this education system that you think we should be calling for in our schools?
Yeah, I mean, it's a draft vision, but definitely do have one. And it's the result of kind of lots of conversations I have across the sector and with young people. And
Mm-hmm.
when I say the sector, I mean the education sector, but also the environmental sector. And yeah, at the heart of it is young people having more freedom, and and it's based around a belief which is a long-standing one in education, that when you give young people and adults more freedom to learn, to choose what they learn and how they learn, they're more likely then to develop the knowledge, the skills and values that they'll need to create a better world. So we're asking them to be more like themselves, not more like me when we're doing that. We're saying go out there, like, we want you to be who you are, because who you are is probably quite a creative, inquisitive, cooperative, compassionate person. Like, we have a myth in society that people are self-interested and sort of individualistic and kind of want to be like that, but it is a myth. And actually, all of the research into what people actually value and how they want to live, most people deep down are caring people who want to cooperate. They don't want like huge amounts of wealth. They understand that wealth comes from different places and not just money and fame and status. They understand it comes from connection and sort of learning and so on. And actually, that's what they're pursuing in their lives. And so if you let people go and pursue those things, they will probably go out and create that sort of world. So it's kind of based on, actually, we're seeing more and more of this as well. Like things like the rise of EPQs and how popular they're becoming is showing how hungry young people are to choose what they learn and be able to do it. And it's also showing they can be trusted as well. That they can actually, you can just set them free and say, go and pick a topic you want to learn about and work towards it, qualification in it, and that's happening. So back to the vision, trying to sort of draft this up, and if we're thinking about publishing it next year as a kind of provocative piece to sort of talk about this, is essentially it would be more democratic, it would be more decentralized, it would be kind of more lightly instrumentalized. So it wouldn't be sort of really that kind of what I was talking about before, about having a bit of a purpose but not being really dogmatic about it. There'd be a greater focus on education as an end in itself, sort of just it's worth doing for its own good. And teachers and learners have more freedom about what they teach, how they teach, and it will bring them closer to their humanity effectively, and then develop that agentic world making. So we've got to be pragmatic and try and deal in the art of what's possible. And so the kind of framework which I'm kind of putting out there, I think it's the first time we've talked about it outside of our organisation. So
wow, thank you.
It's basically a 3/3 curriculum is what we're talking about. So we have a national curriculum, a local curriculum, and a personal curriculum. And within that system, teachers would have agency over how teaching is done, pedagogic autonomy, which is, obviously strong in some countries like Finland, for example, where it's really strong. Teachers get told what to teach, but they get more freedom over how to teach it. But they'd also get some more autonomy over what is taught. So we'd have a third of your school day or your school week would be decided at the national level. And personally, I'd love that to be through a sort of a national citizens assembly, about where people come together to decide what is it that young people need to know, what do they need to know how to do, and make sure they're getting the basics, which will probably result in numeracy, literacy, core science things, and so on. Those core things will be covered there. And then you'd have a local curriculum, which again could be created through a deliberative democracy process, through a citizens' assembly, where maybe you bring together people in the sort of the size of a constituency, like a political constituency or a county or local authority, and you'd have business people, public sector people from charities, parents, young people, all kind of deliberating on what else should children learn on top of the national stuff. And there you'd get, more sort of the local history, more things which are relevant to the local area. I live in a seaside town, things which are tourism and learning about how that works would probably crop up. And then you have the final third will be a personal curriculum, which is where the teachers and the young people are able to come up with their own ideas of what they want to learn. So maybe they'd spend every afternoon working on a project, either individually or in a team, doing some project-based learning around a topic of their choice, just following their nose, following their interests. And through doing that, they're obviously developing that sense of agency and their ability to create change in the world. And in that environment, in an education system like that, young people would be sort of shaping their day a bit more, because they'd be able to sort of choose what they were learning and sort of think about how long it's going to take and when they're going to do it. they'd obviously be supported by their teachers in that. They wouldn't be completely left to their own devices, which is, pun intended. They'd kind of having that sort of agency to create their own little life world in their school would help them to develop that broader agentic world making, and to help them to sort of form the habit and sort of start to identify, I guess, as somebody who can make change in the world, and who, that is who they are and what they will do in their world, rather than being kind of passive and letting the world be decided for them. So in some schools, not all schools, some schools, children have every minute of their day kind of decided for them by the school, and they have no agency, or very, very little agency, even at playtime, and
exactly.
So that makes them passive and dependent. Whereas if you give them some independence and some freedom, they're going to develop that sort of they're going to experience what it's like to shape the world, even if it's just their little world that they're living in right now. But they'll experience what that's like, which will put them in good stead to go into their adult life as shapers of the world, rather than kind of passive sort of adapters to the world as it changes. That's a bit wordy. Hope that's okay.
No, and I think you're totally right, because if we're not giving young people that autonomy and that agency at a young age, what we're doing again is back to giving them a disservice, because when they're adults, they're not used to having choice. Like it's like anything with children, isn't it? Like with food, with anything, if you're deciding everything for them all the time, when there comes a time that they'll have to make a choice, they'll probably make poor choices because they're not equipped. So on something so big as looking after our planet and making good choices for society in the future, if we don't give them that freedom, and I even see it even on a basic level with my students, and I absolutely love my students, but I can see for some of them where they have been so almost spoon-fed through some of our education systems that they get to higher education as an adult 18 plus, and they don't know how to be independent. So I think the same applies, doesn't it, if we're learning about our planet? If we're not preparing them at a young age, it's not going to come naturally.
That's it. And because of the crisis that we're heading into with the climate crisis, ecological breakdown and so on, and how that's going to impact society, and is already impacting society, we can't go on with the same social, cultural, economic, political systems that we've got right now. They do need to change, and they will change whether we like it or not, really. And what we don't want is a scenario where we move into a world where that change is dictated from a small number of very powerful figures at the top of society, because that's where the route to kind of dictatorships and so on comes from. And actually, if young people are able to feel like they are agents of change and actually experience what it's like to create change in their schools, maybe in groups. Like there's one of the, this is where we get to pedagogies and stuff, is the most popular stuff we do is where we go into schools and we enable young people in groups to do projects on issues or to tackle issues in their school or in the world that they think are important. Like we don't say we want you to do a project on climate or litter or water. We say, what is it that you really care about, and actually enable them to, through the process, and they're kind of guided through this by their teachers. They're sort of enabled to do a project and to create a change on the thing that they care about. And it doesn't really matter what the issue is. It's what they're learning is that they can make change and what it takes to do it, and that it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's rewarding, and it's kind of, and then it's that agentic world making. And we call them generation action. Like that's what we're trying to nurture, is generation action, and that they feel like it's possible for them to actually create change, because change needs to happen. Like the future's kind of the way things are headed. We can't keep going with the existing systems, and unless we have sort of generation coming through who are both able to create change, but also willing and sort of wanting to do it. It's going to be the change is going to be done to them rather than by them, and that's not what we need.
But I've got to say, Dr. Morgan, it does sound idyllic and dreamy. But I guess my last question: are there actually, in your opinion, any signs to suggest that this beautiful vision for children being able to be change makers could actually become a reality, or do you think we're going to be stuck with our same clunky education system, trying to churn out SATs and GCSEs? Like, are there any glimmers of hope, like in your, and I mean, you're in an interesting position because you've kind of got one foot in education, one foot in, sustainability. Like, what's your opinion? Could this like, please tell me, for my children's sake, I've got 3 children, could this happen? Like, could this be a reality?
Yeah, and I have a 2-year-old, and kind of makes me think about it a lot. I think there's definitely hope for me in this, because I think there's a couple of things. I think on a really practical level, in the UK, we have a different education system in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland to what we have in England. And we are seeing, I mean, I know the curriculum for Wales better because I live in Wales, and part of the reason we moved back here is so my son can go into that education system. It is kind of prioritizing independent learning and so on. So like,
Brilliant.
There's hope sort of within the UK that, if we get a change of government, there'll be a whole scale curriculum review and review of the education system and assessment and so on. And you would hope they'd look at what's happening elsewhere in the UK as a kind of first port of call, and maybe leapfrog it. So there's a potential there that we could move in that direction anyway. But I think the bigger thing is actually what we're talking about really here, this system of national, local and personal curriculum. What we're talking about is trust, and actually trusting teachers, trusting learners to kind of use the power that we be giving them wisely, and not just to go off and sort of play computer games all day or like teach really inappropriate things to young people. We've got to trust that most people actually are good people and do care about the future and do care about young people. And actually what this kind of, whether we are going to get a situation where the people in power now are going to use their power to give power away, to devolve power into this sort of decentralized model. What's I think is giving me a lot of hope at the moment is that mainstream kind of organizations like the IPPR are really sort of starting to question the kind of fundamental, I guess it's like, perception of human nature, which has had a kind of stronghold over society probably since like the Cold War period onwards, really. Like it was assumed that most people are kind of self-interested, and they're driven by extrinsic rewards like pay and status, and also extrinsic things like fear, and that assumption that people were kind of self-interested led to a form of managing the public sector, including teachers, which tried to gain that self-interest. So it was sort of, okay, we just have to accept that people are selfish. There's no such thing as a sense of public duty. It's kind of people will talk the talk and say they're altruistic and kind, but really they're not. Really they're self-interested. And that kind of assumption is at the heart of kind of what led to what was called new public management. And it's been at the heart of the public sector for 3 or 4 decades now. And what's happened with it is that what we've found out from it is that while you can kind of extrinsically motivate people up to a point to do a good job, be tapping into their intrinsic motivation, which is like their deep down sort of enjoyment of being a teacher, or their desire to care for the world and care for the planet. You're not sort of tapping into that intrinsic motivation, which means that teachers do a good enough job, but they don't necessarily go that one step further and do a really great job. I mean, I'm generalizing. Some teachers do manage to bring their intrinsic motivation into education, but for a lot of teachers, it gets kind of pushed to the side, and they're so under the cosh and sort of being forced by various factors to educate in a certain way, and they're always living in fear of the next inspection and all that. They're not sort of given the freedom to sort of teach in the ways they want to teach, and actually get their own kind of intrinsic reward from it, which is beyond the extrinsic financial reward of it. The actual sort of, oh my goodness, that was brilliant, like I'm uplifted by the growth I've seen in that student, or I feel so uplifted by what we're doing as a school and how this is setting us on a path to a green and thriving future and so on. Like that sort of intrinsic motivation has been squashed. But what we're seeing is that as we kind of understand that kind of new public management system of managing people in the public sector isn't isn't taking us to sort of like from good enough to great. It's starting to be questioned, and we're starting to think about actually we can shift, and we do need to tap into these intrinsic motivations. That itself comes from a broader conversation which is happening. People like Rutger Bregman, John Alexander, there's a great organisation called Common Cause who've done lots of research on this, who are really showing that while there's a kind of perception out there that most people are sort of self-interested and consumerist and individualistic, and that's just what we're like as human beings, that's just our nature. What they're showing is that that's really not true. Maybe 25% of the population, I think the research shows maybe 25% of the population are really motivated by status and power and wealth and so on. But 2 people are motivated by cooperation, creativity, care for the planet, justice and so on. And those are the things which really drive people. And so we're seeing that. So if we can remove that kind of misperception that people are all selfish and actually shift to a perception where people are compassionate and care about things bigger than self, then we'll start to trust each other and say, yeah, it's okay to give people freedom because we can trust them not to sort of be selfish with the power that we're giving them. We can trust them to be compassionate and altruistic with that power. And that story is starting to evolve. John Alexander calls it a citizen shift. And we're shifting from a story of ourselves being consumers to a story of ourselves being citizens. And we're seeing more and more of it in society. And I think more and more policy is being built around it. You think look at things like Hilary Cotton's work on radical health and so on. This is all about enabling groups of people to make decisions for themselves and trusting them in those decisions, rather than having these kind of top-down, one-size-fits-all models, which are based on the assumption that we just can't trust people. We have to kind of use a stick to kind of punish them, or we have to use carrots of financial incentives to make them change their behaviour. So yeah, that's where the hope is for me. That's
I love that. In the 75% of us.
Yeah, and there's actual
including our
research to
listeners.
Yeah, and we did research on it with young people recently to show how compassionate they are, and actually that they when they're younger, they actually have a more accurate view of each other. Like they do see each other as being kind and fair and cooperative, and as they get older into their teenagers, it kind of drifts away, and they actually start to feel that others are self-interest. And if we can close that, if we can address that misperception, which is what we try and do some of our projects, then automatically young people then go, oh, okay, I'm not the only one who cares about these issues. More people care about it than I thought. And that is a real motivator for them to then sort of step up and take action. And that's not just in their school life, but in their adult life as well. Like we know that people who trust other people and think other people are good, fundamentally good, they're more likely to vote, they're more likely to volunteer, they're more likely to get involved in creating change locally. So there's huge. I've got a lot of kind of hope in that we are shifting that direction, but we just need that story to kick in a bit more.
That's fantastic. So the final word then from you, Dr. Morgan, is that there is hope. We just need to be better communicators, continue working together. And I guess it comes back to, I really like what you're saying there, like remembering our why, I guess, remembering why we get into education, remembering, what it is to be human, and kind of going back to those natural roots, I guess, and kind of trying to shed some of that consumerist drive and that drive for money and wealth, and actually remember what's important in life. And without a planet, there won't be one.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Amazing. So much food for thought. We've got some lovely comments in the chat. Thank you, David, who says lots to think about from this discussion. Some other chats online saying thank you, Morgan, for your viewpoints today. So I just want to end by thanking you so much for your time on a Friday morning, Morgan, and coming and talking to us today.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity, Poppy. It's great to talk to you, and and thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening.
No, it's been a real pleasure. And, you've made talking about some very big, tricky subjects enjoyable on a Friday morning. So thank you so much. If anyone's on Twitter, you can see Morgan tagged in some of our posts. So do give him a follow and get involved in some of those conversations. And Morgan, I hope you have an amazing weekend. Do try and stay warm.
Thank you. Yeah, I will. And you.
Is that part of our climate change, these colder winters here in England?
Well, I won't go into that. We'll be here all day.
Yeah, actually, I just realised
it's a complicated answer.
Let's not ask.
Depends where you live. Depends where you live.
Well, come and find Dr. Morgan Phillips on socials to ask him that question. We'll definitely not open a can of worms as we finish the show today. But thank you so much, Morgan, and hopefully be in touch with you very soon and continue having these really purposeful conversations.
Thanks, Poppy.
Thank you. Take care. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Marie. I can see us listening in today. Sam, David, and everyone else who's joining through the website. I wish you all a very merry weekend. Do stay warm. Do be careful on the pavements. They're super slippy. So wear sensible footwear, please. And I will be back with you very soon with another very special guest. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.